I'd now like to introduce Eric Stanton. Eric Stanton is the Senior Director of ActionWatch, who will be presenting some hard goods data insights. As the Senior Director at ActionWatch, Eric brings 20 plus years of experience in product management, strategic planning, sports research, sales, merchandising, and marketing in both USA and Asia Pacific regions for the likes of Nike, Keen Footwear, and a number of sports-connected companies. He has a history of working with clients to design and implement effective strategies that drive their brand. Welcome, Eric. We appreciate the time that you've given us, and we're really glad to have you here. So I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I know that I'm going to be presenting from a U.S. perspective, but as many say, what happens here happens there, and what happens there happens here, and so on and so forth. So basically, the overview for which I'm going to kind of talk to you about today is going to be a perspective in terms of how did 2022 in the U.S. market do, and how are we doing in the first quarter of 2023. And first of all, I'd like to kind of put a caveat to it. Our company, ActionWatch, we basically track point of sale purchases in some of the biggest and probably most authentic surf retailers in the specialty channel. So it's not the entire U.S. marketplace. It is the specialty channel only, but it still is quite indicative of how the market in general looks. So keep that in mind. Many companies use our data to make any kinds of decisions, whether it's product, within sales, how they handle the relations with retailers. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody kind of understood the scope of where this comes from. First off, just looking at the numbers in general, what you're looking at, and I'm going to go through this deck first and we'll take questions later, but and I don't know how hard this is for you to see it, but this is the trend line in terms of comps, which means any one month in a particular year compared to the month prior. So when you look at this, we can all clearly see that there has been a downturn in the hard goods marketplace in the US. And it's been challenging to say the least, but there are some indicators behind these comps that don't make it kind of seem as bad as it actually is. But there is some things to be explained as to why the market has continued to go downward. But I do see a little bit better future for the marketplace. The other thing I wanted to put into perspective is that, you know, like in Australia, you've got two coasts, and in the US, same thing, and it drives a lot of the business in the Southeast and in the on the West Coast. And one of the topics that's come up in the US was that we've had some pretty extraordinarily bad weather on the West Coast, and that really, in my opinion, and looking at the numbers, has definitely affected the West fairly dramatically. But as it stacks up against to other regions, like, for example, in the South, things weren't really quite as bad. As a matter of fact, in almost all of the larger subcategories in surf hard goods, the South did better than the West. So Hawaii had some good spots there too. So, you know, these are all factors that play in. It could be economic, it can be inflationary. Weather, however, much like you'd see in ski, the weather really follows the sales. And so I definitely see that with weather getting much nicer in Southern California now, this trend will probably be in effect in latter half of April and moving forward. In general, if you just look at hard goods as a comparison between 2022 and 2021, it was down 13% in total. First quarter is down even more. Again, I don't necessarily think that people should feel the sky is falling here. There are some indicators as to why I do believe that number hit, which was weather, but you're going to start to see some stabilization in other areas. As we move into this whole comparison of perspective from time, a lot of people like to talk about pre-COVID, and it's fun to talk about, and it does give some perspective because if you look at where we are right now for 2023, just first quarter, we still are significantly ahead of pre-COVID. We're ahead of pre-COVID in almost every single measure. And when you look at just year-to-year comparisons, really 2022 was where things started to go in the opposite direction. But keep in mind that there was an enormous participation spike that happened because of COVID, like it did in many outdoor sports. So overall, while it maybe doesn't feel good that the projections has been going down, we're still in a fairly good place at the moment, but we need to do the right things to keep it going. When we look at subcategories within hard goods, this is one area where you can really see what speaks, right? For your core golfers versus your casual golfers, you may be seeing a very different purchase pattern depending on the type of boards they're buying. And that can be reflected in terms of people that come into the sport during the pandemic, but didn't come back to update their technology. So you're going to be able to see some trends here. And really, it's going to be how many of those casual surfers are now getting ready to replace their equipment, their boards, their leashes, all of it. And so there has been a gap here that we're seeing. And the hope and the anticipation is purchasing cycles will change and there will be a bit of an uptick because participation is still pretty strong in the US right now. In the first quarter, again, we're still getting hit by some heavy numbers that are in the wrong direction. But again, while these numbers are high, they kind of mimic what happened in 2022. The numbers might be higher, but in certain subcategories, some are worse than others, and it held true in the first quarter to what happened in 2022. But this is the part that really gets interesting. And really, it's about how healthy is the market. And when I say health, what I really mean is margins and inventory. Because there was, as many of you know, supply chain issues, participation went up, couldn't sell enough things in 2020. And then people didn't come back and there were container issues. And then all of a sudden, retailers had more product than they could handle. A, because people weren't coming back to buy, and B, they were just jammed full of inventory. And so margins are really a key indicator to the health. And as retailers have been discounting quite heavily, but they are working through their inventories. And that's a key component to sort of a reset for hard goods, at least in the US. And so I do see these as indicators that the margins are starting to get a little bit better. And that's a great indication because that means a lot of older product has gotten sold through and you can finally start getting some newer product and selling at a little bit better price. The other here, when I talk about margins by subcategories, actually margins are starting to creep up in the first quarter as a year-on-year comparison. And again, like I stressed, the importance is not just the complete dollar sales, it's how healthy is your inventory and margins. So we're starting to see this slight creep in the right direction. And this is the positive side that I'm saying, is that these are measures that if they continue to hold true, I think there's going to be sort of a correction that's happening, but participation hasn't really changed a whole lot. It's the marketplace that's correcting a bit. And that's a good sign. Hard for some retailers, definitely hard for retailers and hard for manufacturers. But it's important to have an industry that's stable. And I do believe that we're heading in that direction. And this is the participation, just as a quick overview. The spike happened and did we hold? Well, in the casual surfer for 2022, it actually grew slightly. For the core, which is a really important component, those that surf more than 8 times a year, it dipped a little bit. And that's the only caveat that's concerning. That core represents an enormous percentage of sales. And so the core is always going to be the most important component, but it's going to be converting those casual surfers to step up with their equipment and to really engage even more. But it's still very healthy in terms of participation. And so I do see positives going forward in 2023. And these crazy comps, they're in the past, and we're still in a relatively good place when you compare it to 3 to 4 years ago. So I know that was quick, and I know that we'll be having questions later, and I can elaborate on some of these dynamics or these data points for you a little bit later. But that's sort of my quick overview on where things are in the US right now. So as I touched on regional, you may have heard it, but this is the visual that, key to any continent or wherever you're surfing, there's always going to be a coastline in one area versus another where weather will definitely affect the outcomes. And so when I spoke to this a second ago, basically it's quite evident. First quarter in the US, weather was horrific on the West Coast, and it definitely affected sales, and it was better in the Southeast. And conversely, we see some good things here, which makes me feel, as everything I said earlier, about the fact that while the numbers are down and we're down in the first quarter, there were some positives, and some of it was regional. And if all three regions could have aligned with weather, I think things would have definitely been better. The next slide this was just an overview visually to show you that 2022 was down versus 2021, and that in the first quarter, the numbers not looking particularly great, but first quarter is not the biggest quarter in terms of overall sales. But again, I do believe there were some reasons why this number was down, as I alluded to. The other was, and I'll speak to this in general terms, that basically all of the year-on-years that are up, it was 2022 that was down. And pre-COVID, it's still a rock star. We're way ahead of where we were. And even first quarter 23 versus 19. And I know at some point we can't keep going back that far to make ourselves feel good, but these numbers still, need to be said so people kind of understand we're still in a really good place. The next slide was a subcategory, just indicator of how 2022 did. This is where my comment was around, depending on your ability to surf, you may be purchased big in one area like softboards, and you didn't come back. And you didn't come back yet because you weren't ready to come back and make the next purchase and step up. So this is a trend where softboards probably were completely over purchased by retailers because there was such a huge upswing initially with a lot of people coming into the sport. So that's a trend. And that's why I say I think some are going to come back in that started during the pandemic, and they're probably going to be upping their purchases. The other was just first quarter, kind of like 2022, you're seeing a lot of these negative numbers are very similar in certain subcategories to what you saw in 2022. And then when I speak into the health of the industry, this is just a snapshot of where the margins were. I mean, clearly in hard goods, margins are going to be lower. It's a matter of whether you're losing a lot or you're starting to gain something. And we're still above pre-pandemic. And first quarter actually versus pre-pandemic is up even higher. And we are seeing certain subcategories doing better than others in the first quarter. So there's some good hope there. And inventories are flat, up a little bit in some cases versus the total in terms of 2019, 2022, but it's relatively flat. And inventories are going to be key. I think a lot of stuff has been sold through in the fourth quarter of 2022 and first quarter. The other was just looking at the margin, like I mentioned, by subcategory. And they were down in 2022 versus 2021. But this is that creep that I was talking about. It's creeping up in first quarter. So newer product, margins doing better, clearing inventory. So I think this is, as I said, another indication that things are getting better. And then the last was my comment about participation. It's still pretty strong. Core was down a little bit in 2022, but the casual actually took a bump. So, you've got all those surfers out there that are somewhat new, and some will leave. New will come in, but those that stuck with it for a couple of years might be ready, as I mentioned, to kind of jump in and spend a little bit more money. So that, unfortunately, I'm sorry you didn't see that the first time around, but that is, that's it. So if you do have questions, let me know and I can refer back to a slide if you'd like.
Thanks, Eric, and thank you for running through that the second time around. So as mentioned, if you want us to send a question through to Eric, actually, I do have a question for you here. It is a question from Bo Brown saying we are seeing the same trends in the skate, or sorry, it's more of a comment. We are seeing the same trends in the skateboard hard goods as surf.
Yeah. I know I'm just showing surf, but boy, if you saw skate, it's even worse. And I don't say that to joke. It really has been hit hard. And yes, but the difference between surf and skate is the demographic is dramatically different. We're talking about a core demographic between 35 and 55, somewhere in that range, who have, income, who have disposable income, and skate. The demo is down in the 18, early 20, or actually even younger than 18, sorry. So there's a lot of competition for young skaters now, and we're seeing it in a lot of electrical bikes, a lot of other electrical type of apparatuses like the single wheel apparatus and so on and so forth. So that industry is really, it's tough. On the soft goods side of that industry, which is lifestyle driven with footwear and apparel, we're not seeing that. It's still quite strong. Yes, these are hard goods stores. So we have, from the entire panel that we have, these are not mall-based retailers. These are true specialty core. If you're familiar with some of the names in Southern California, like Hanson's is a big one. We have like Maui Knicks, HIC in Hawaii. There are some serious players that provide their data. And so, yes, this is a pretty good snapshot of the specialty channel. And as I said, this is only as large as the panel that we match sales to. But for our clients, our manufacturers, when we talk to them about this panel, they're very confident. It gives a very good indication of the trends.